Scattered across this nation, there are places abandoned, boarded up, mysterious. I will unlock their doors and make them yield their secrets. From an extraordinary hospital that pioneered the idea of free medical care for people living on the fringe of society, at a time when the public were paying to gawp at disabled people, the London hospital offered him sanctuary. In a world filled with danger, one of the things that's so chilling about the Ripper is that he dissected his victims, went looking for organs. Who was this man? To a remarkable 400-year-old prison that can reveal the story of British crime and punishment. If these stones could speak, I wonder what stories they'd tell me about the men, women and children who eked out their sentences in cramped cells.
Murder. I killed my mate.
To top-secret military facilities hidden away on our coast. I've arrived in the spookiest place with a random collection of buildings, a lighthouse, what appears to be a windmill, roofless bunkers, pagodas, where weapons of mass destruction were tested. Radioactive materials in ponds under liquid. That is unbelievable. This will be my hidden history of Britain. In this programme, I'm prizing open the doors to a 250-year-old hospital. Here's a Georgian building and the story of hundreds of patients, doctors, anatomists. An institution that pioneered medical breakthroughs.
Then put your cryptoscope against the patient. I can see your heart beating, I can see your lungs moving, I can see your diaphragm.
From the nurses who helped to bring life into the world.
Nurse, there's something in the bed. And I pulled it back and there was a baby.
To the doctors who unlocked the secrets of the dead.
They'd all had their throats cut, and the throats were cut from left to right.
The East End of London has a unique place in our history. John Strype's survey of London back in 1720 described 4 areas: the City of London, Westminster, Southwark, and that part beyond the Tower. Even then, the East End was on the edge. This part of East London has seen waves of immigrants, radical politics, the most notorious serial killer in history. At its heart is the London Hospital, founded 2.5 centuries ago on a principle that strikes me as very modern. Here, the poor were to receive free medical care. Its doors were to be open to everyone, regardless of means. Inside this abandoned hospital is the history of how that ideal was pioneered many decades before we conceived of a national health service. The London Hospital spans some of the greatest breakthroughs in medical history. It can give me extraordinary insight into the story of British medicine. It's been totally abandoned since 2012, and it's about to be developed into a new headquarters for Tower Hamlets Council. This is my last chance to uncover its secrets. Well, the building as viewed from across the street was noble and elegant, and here it's not like that at all. It's all bird droppings and hardboard, plywood, creaky doors. Automatic door. Not. There we go. Oh, wow. Well, the interior has the feeling of a 20th century building, 21st century building. Just feels like people left here yesterday. It has that feeling of the Mary Celeste. Imagine the receptionist sitting there and all the patients sitting in their chairs. Under here somewhere, presumably, beyond all these 60s and 70s roof tiles, is a Georgian building and the story of hundreds of people, patients, doctors, anatomists, all to be discovered. Yeah, there's just layers and layers to peel away. Oh, here we go. To the memory of those of the London hospital who gave their lives in the Great Wars. That's the sort of thing I'm looking for. Historical detail. But this building is also filled with clues to its most recent history. That is the shoe or the clog that's worn by a surgeon in the theatre. And this one has been abandoned with the hospital, a sort of surgical Cinderella. Lots of fluorescent lights. Storeroom key. Slides. Some of these show facial deformities. These are obviously taken for good medical purposes. Such disfigurement must be challenging to live with. But in Victorian Britain, those who were malformed might live as outcasts, rejected by family, friends and society. The London couldn't afford to admit residential patients, but it became home for a man whose deformity was thought so horrific that he hid his face from the world. The Elephant Man, suffering from terrible deformities, was displayed in public, from which he made a living. But he was, in fact, a man with a name, Joseph Merrick. He was exhibited in 1884 at the Pathological Society of London by a surgeon at this hospital, Frederick Treves. And when 2 years later Merrick was found collapsed, the discovery of Treves's calling card in his pocket caused him to be brought to this hospital, to an attic room that would become his sanctuary.
I see Joseph Merrick shuffling up and down the corridors, looking for solitude.
Biographer Joanne Mungovin comes from Merrick's home city of Leicester. She decided to write about Joseph after discovering that she was related to Tom Norman, the showman who exhibited the Elephant Man at a Whitechapel freak show.
He was completely unique.
A gentle gentleman.
There's never been anyone like him.
There were thousands of people coming through this hospital each year. For Merrick to spend this long period, 4 years here, must have been extremely unusual. How was it managed?
It was incredibly unusual. This was a hospital to cure people. It was not a hospital for incurables. So Frederick Treves spoke to the chairman of the London Hospital, Francis Cargon, who actually wrote a letter to the Times asking for people to help actually fund him. And they managed to get about £250, which was an extraordinary amount of money to actually keep him here in this hospital in Whitechapel.
Joanne has brought some artefacts from the Royal London Museum. That is an extraordinary object, isn't it? That is the very hat that he wore, and look at the size of it. It immediately brings home to you the dimension of his deformity.
Oh, it does indeed. I think his head was about 38 inches in diameter.
And this is a veil.
He wore the cap, and then underneath it's the veil, because if you look further down, you can see the little pillar box slits where his eyes would have gone through.
And this was because it was felt that he was just so hideous that he couldn't be shown to ordinary people. Was Frederick Treves doing medical work with Merrick?
Yes, he was. He was using him as a medical specimen. This is an actual illustration of Joseph Merrick in this book, which was printed in about 1885. Here we can actually see Joseph's deformities on his right-hand side.
So what you can see here, obviously, is this very distended right arm. This side of the body is normal.
It is. Frederick Treves referred to it as very feminine, and it was about the same size as a 12-year-old girl.
And it's just generically entitled A Case of Congenital Deformity.
That's right, it is, yeah.
What else have you brought to show us?
This is a copy of the only surviving letter that we have that Joseph Merrick wrote. We don't know whether Joseph was right or left-handed, but he was an educated man and he had the most beautiful writing. It was written to a lady called Lila Manturin, a benefactor.
I saw Mr. Treves on Sunday. He said I was to give his best respects to you.
As you see, it's signed, yours truly, Joseph Merrick, London Hospital, Whitechapel.
I must say that is really unexpected to me. I had no idea that he was able to read and write.
It's absolutely beautiful.
I've discovered that inside the broken body of the Elephant Man there was a strong intelligence and even delicacy. At a time when the public were paying to gawp at disabled people, the London hospital offered him sanctuary. A kindness well ahead of its time that illustrates its commitment to serve all. After Joseph's death, his skeleton was kept at this hospital as part of its collection. And as I'm about to discover, because it was one of Britain's foremost training hospitals, the London went to extraordinary lengths to get bodies for its research. So they take people who've died in the hospital, bury them, dig them up again, dismember them, and put them back, with the patients looking down from the windows thinking, wow, that could be me next week. I've come to the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel to uncover the hidden history of British healthcare. For 2.5 centuries, doctors here cared for London's poorest and pioneered groundbreaking medicine. Now, this looks like sort of the main drag of the hospital. Pharmacy, hematology, pregnancy tests. Generations of doctors and nurses came here to learn their profession at one of Britain's finest teaching hospitals. Just imagine the corridors would have been teeming with trolleys and patients and nurses and doctors. Historically, the only way to learn how the body worked was to take it apart. In the 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci made a thoroughly original study of human anatomy. Dissecting 30 corpses, he produced a series of extraordinary drawings that unlocked the mysteries of the human body. By the time the London Hospital was built, anatomy was a cornerstone of modern medicine. On the corridor with the operating theatres, here is one. Masses of equipment left behind, lights, clocks have stopped. And then here are the remains of the grandstand, so the students could be up here, row after row of them, peering down on whatever was happening in the middle of the room. Maybe an operation, maybe an anatomy lecture, maybe a dissection. Even today, some people are squeamish about donating their corpses for dissection. But losing your body to medicine was more taboo 200 years ago. So who were medical students cutting up then?
Walking up to the London Hospital is very peculiar because I knew it when it was a busy, active hospital in London, and I was often here doing dissections.
Forensic pathologist Richard Shepherd consulted on the Bloody Sunday inquiry and the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. He spent a quarter of a century cutting up bodies to unlock their secrets. Are you Richard?
I am indeed. Very nice to meet you, Michael. Come in.
Very good to see you.
Come in and join me.
So, I'm in an operating theatre like it was just abandoned yesterday, but a somewhat unusual patient.
This is a very unusual patient. Pigs and other animals were very commonly used as a dissection tool in the 16th, 17th, 19th century, running up until Anatomy Acts and when human bodies became much more available to be used by the medical students.
So if you're going to do something useful to this patient, what do you use?
Well, the equipment hasn't changed much actually in hundreds of years, and we've got some examples over here. If we look at the equipment from the early 19th century, and really all it is a set of scalpels.
Yes, very sharp.
Well, I don't think this remains sharp, but because the reason they would have 7 or 8 in a box is because they would go blunt so quickly.
Really? And are those ivory handles? They're very lovely.
I think that's bone.
Bone? Yeah.
I think it's bone.
You may say they're blunt, but they scare the hell out of me. Let me give that back to you.
That is blunt. That's just a pair of forceps. And this is the equipment I have nowadays to do a dissection. pair of forceps.
Yes, very similar.
Okay. And now this is sharp.
Yes.
The knife. Okay, this is very sharp. These are all disposable now. And we can use it, and would you like me to show a little bit of dissection?
Yeah.
So the way we do the techniques is just simply by using these bits of equipment, and we simply make an incision.
Now, I suppose one of the most complicated organs will be the heart. Is there anything you can show me about that?
This bit of the heart, there's the aorta, the main blood vessel there, comes out and goes into the main body, and this is the pulmonary artery.
I mean, you do this quite a lot. I'm just trying not to faint here, but you go ahead.
It's just a fantastic bit of engineering. And what the medical students were trying to understand, and they were being taught, was the anatomy of the heart, the chambers of the heart, how the blood flowed through the heart and kept the body alive. And those were the crucial things.
And for a lot of that understanding, our dear pig would have served us well.
Absolutely, because there were still huge problems in getting human bodies for dissection. And that continued until 1752 with the Murder Act, which meant that bodies could be used, but it was only the bodies of people that had been hung, had been executed.
In the 1820s, there was an explosion in private medical schools. There were 800 medical students in London alone. The bulk of these regularly practiced dissection. The intense demand from the medical profession for corpses created a lucrative market for those willing to steal them out of graves. An adult body might fetch 20 guineas, a fortune, although a child maybe only 6 shillings per foot. A hospital like this had a reliable supply of cadavers.
If you were here standing on this spot in the early 19th century, you would have been stood in the burial ground that was attached to the hospital.
Louise Fowler was one of the lead archaeologists on a huge excavation of the hospital grounds carried out in 2007. Louise.
Oh, hello, Michael.
Hello. So why have we
Hello.
met on this barren piece of ground? What's the interest here?
Well, we're standing in the 19th century burial ground that was attached to the hospital.
And this ground, what kind of numbers did it yield?
The area that we excavated, we found 260 burials. There was something quite unusual about some of the remains that we found in the coffins. We didn't just find burials of complete individuals, we also found burials of dissected remains. Before the Anatomy Act, the only legal source of bodies for dissection were those of executed criminals.
And why were the bodies of executed people allowed? What was the thinking there?
Well, it was seen as a punishment worse than death, really. If your body was dissected and cut up into lots of pieces, it meant that your physical corpse couldn't be resurrected.
Yeah, so I mean, this really went to the very heart of matters as far as people were concerned. I mean, this was a terribly important thought.
Yes.
That their body couldn't walk up and go to heaven.
Yeah.
So before 1832, people who'd been executed could then be dissected. But were others dissected too?
Yes, there were other ways of supplying corpses to the medical schools. One of them was to turn to the services of a group of people that we know as the resurrection men. So they would go to burial grounds and they would dig up the bodies of recently deceased people and they would sell them to the medical schools. But we also know that at the London, they were using the bodies of dead patients as well to supply the medical school.
With permission?
No, not with permission. They were being buried in the burial ground and then they were being dug up at night and taken into the medical school.
During the 19th century, most people believed that come Judgment Day, if they'd been good, not only would their soul, but also their body would be resurrected. And so if their corpse went missing, that meant no paradise. On the other hand, medical men needed cadavers to experiment. And that led to the shenanigan here where dead patients would be buried and then dug out again to be dissected and then replaced, all with the patients looking on. But thanks to having those bodies, enormous improvements were made in medicine. I'm discovering that the London hospital has a secret history, where the quest for medical progress and body trading went hand in hand. When Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, died at the age of 27, his illness was still a mystery. The London hospital has kept his skeleton for over a century.
When Merrick first came into the hospital, one of the main quests was to try and fully understand what was wrong with him.
Professor Richard Trembleth from King's College London is a geneticist working to uncover the nature of Merrick's illness.
It's the over 100-year mystery. My predecessors have been considering this over the whole of that time.
Richard has brought the only existing replica of Joseph Merrick's skeleton. Is there any hope today that we can find out what was wrong with Merrick?
One of the things that's very clear is that this must have been a genetic condition, an abnormality of the DNA. And of course, there have been very significant advances in our ability to actually extract material that allows us to read the genetic code.
If you did intervene with Merrick's skeleton, what would you actually have to do? I mean, is it a kind of big operation?
Well, let me just show you, if I may. This is a bone from, actually, it's a female whose skeleton was also in the museum, the Royal London.
You've made this big hole here, have you?
This is in our efforts to see whether we can extract DNA of sufficient quantity and quality from the skeleton in order to then be able to read that DNA. We obviously are trying to perfect the technique here before our efforts on the skeleton of Merrick, because, of course, that's quite damaging, and we want to make sure we preserve the skeleton in every way we possibly can.
Merrick really is quite a figure in the history of this hospital.
Oh, without any question. You may know amongst those who have been fascinated, included Michael Jackson. He would come and spend time on his own, sitting next to the skeleton, obviously contemplating with Merrick.
It might seem macabre that the Elephant Man's skeleton is still kept in the London hospital. But if doctors finally crack the genetic code locked inside his bones, Joseph could help patients today. And as the 20th century approached, unlocking the secrets of the dead became even more important as doctors worked to uncover Britain's most notorious serial killer. One of the things that's so chilling about the Ripper is that he dissected his victims. Where do you learn that stuff? Who was this man? I'm halfway through my investigation of the London Hospital in Whitechapel. This extraordinary institution was founded 250 years ago to care for the poorest people in London. Here in the East End of London in Victorian times, there was poverty, overcrowding, and prostitution. Violent assaults were frequent, and even murders not uncommon. But in the summer of 1888, there were killings so brutal that even this crime-hardened community was struck with horror.
The London Hospital, this building, is part of the landscape of the Ripper killings. They all take place within this very small geographical area.
Between the 31st of August and the 9th of November, 5 women were brutally murdered in Whitechapel. All of these killings took place a few minutes' walk from the London Hospital. 3 of the victims had lost internal organs.
We've never caught Jack the Ripper. Hundreds of people have been put forward as a potential suspect for the Ripper, members of the royal family down to famous doctors.
Criminologist and social historian Dr. Drew Gray has dedicated himself to the study of East End crime.
In 1888, the newspapers here picked up on this story and kind of create the idea of a serial killer. This is not just a London fascination with the Ripper murders, and this spreads out to America and across the empire. We're spreading this news worldwide.
Drew, we're in what used to be the receiving area of the hospital where patients first came. I know that there's quite a large number of murders that have been attributed to the Ripper and they've been reduced perhaps. So this implies, does it, the East End was kind of full of murderers?
Well, full of murders or full of murders, a dangerous place to live, and brutal attacks on individuals, and particularly on prostitutes working at night, were quite common. There is quite a difference, of course, between the series of murders we associate with the killer known as Jack the Ripper and more common everyday sort of murders because of the level of violence that's used.
What he does to the bodies, does it show a level of medical expertise?
That was what was suggested, particularly after the first murder in August 1888, and takes place just across the road from the London hospital here. Now, after her body has been examined, the police surgeon suggests that this must have been done by somebody with a good medical knowledge, perhaps a knowledge of dissection.
Are you convinced by this? Are you convinced that the person had some kind of anatomical knowledge?
I think that the speed with which this person mutilates and takes out organs from bodies, because that's what we're talking about, on the street, in dim lighting, that suggests to me somebody who knows what they're doing to some degree. Now, whether that's a person who's medically trained, that's perhaps a difficult thing to judge completely. But I think there's something in it, certainly.
And what are the chances, do you think, that the Ripper is associated with this hospital?
It's certainly an association that's been made. There is a trade in dead people. Body dealers or undertakers would work on the streets around an area like Whitechapel looking for people who've passed away. I think it's important that this person understands the area and is a figure that people aren't necessarily threatened by in this area. So a doctor might fit that bill.
Now, what are these artefacts you brought with you?
We have a variety of things here. We have some letters. This letter here, titled From Hell, is addressed to a man called Mr. Lusk. Now, Mr. Lusk was the head of a sort of neighbourhood watch. So this letter arrives after Catherine Eddowes and Liz Stride had been murdered on the same night. It says, "Sir, I sent you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk." What was interesting about this letter was it arrived with a small parcel attached. And when Mr. Lusk opened the small parcel, what he found inside was what seemed to be a piece of human kidney.
One of the things that's so chilling about the Ripper is that he mutilated his victims, dissected his victims, went looking for organs, found a kidney, cut it out. Where do you learn that stuff? Who was this man? The mystery has gripped the public imagination and medical science for over 100 years, inspiring doctors to dig deeper into the secrets of the dead.
Forensic pathology, of course, is the science of the law, and it gives us the answers to so many questions that ultimately very seriously affect people's lives. Sometimes it means they go to prison, sometimes it means they stay free.
Forensic pathologist Richard Shepherd has performed over 20,000 autopsies, many at the London. He's reviewed the medical evidence from the Ripper murders. So how was this hospital connected to the killings?
Half of the kidney of Catherine Eddowes turned up. It was sent to this hospital, actually. A man called Lusk received it, and he brought it to Dr. Openshaw at this hospital, who examined it and declared that he thought it was half a woman's kidney, and he said it's a ginny kidney. In other words, this is someone who used to drink gin, which would fit very well with the lifestyle of Catherine Eddowes. There's the kidney. It's tucked in the side of the abdomen. It was cut, I think, across the middle, and half was in the body.
What is the state of forensic medicine in those days?
Pretty much embryonic. They knew that they needed to document injuries, they knew they needed to describe things, but they still weren't doing it to the standard we'd want today. What happens is the police will call on a surgeon or a GP, someone to perform the examination for them, but they don't have any special skills in understanding forensic aspects of the death.
But these unfortunate women, they were subjected to post-mortems, were they?
They were all subjected to post-mortems, yes.
And do we know what they concluded from those post-mortems?
The key feature that runs through all five in that period is they all suffered from a cut throat. They'd all had their throats cut, and the throats were cut from left to right across the necks.
So there was a modus operandi.
There was certainly a modus killing, yes, for these people, and it followed through all 5.
And were the poor women mutilated in much the same way?
Yes, they were, but there was a progression, as you often see in these serial murderers, was they get an interest in performing these acts after death. And the first one, there was just some slash wounds to the abdomen. The second one, this was worse. Then when we look at the 5th case, this body had been taken inside. It was in a tenement building, in a room. Now, what this means, of course, is he's sure that he's not going to be disturbed. And that 5th body was extensively mutilated. Organs were removed, slashing to the abdomen, slashing to the legs. Very, very severe damage done.
If you today were looking at a case where particular organs had been removed from a woman, would that lead you to think that this was a very particular sort of killer? I mean, I wouldn't know what to do inside a body.
It leads to the suggestion that this person might have some anatomical knowledge, and a lot of people could have it. Abattoir workers, veterinary surgeons, doctors would all have those clues to enable them perhaps to remove organs from a human body.
19th century doctors lacked the technology to identify the Ripper from the traces left on his victims. But the media frenzy over the murders convinced the Metropolitan Police that they needed new investigative tools to solve crime. And the development of forensic science has been essential to saving lives in medicine. And saving lives was a constant challenge for the doctors of the London hospital. Poverty, malnutrition, disease, and immigration made the East End of London a harsh place. In this life and death struggle, doctors here pioneered medical technology, but the costs were high. X-rays. Great advances were made in radiography in this hospital. Somebody's ribs, somebody's hand. For centuries, the only way to see inside the body was to open it up. But the London hospital had always been in the vanguard of innovation, and in 1895, it led another huge breakthrough in medical science.
An X-ray is high-intensity radiation. When X-rays were discovered, it was called the invisible light. People didn't believe it, and this caused a complete sensation.
Radiographer Adrian Thomas has spent his life shining a light on the human body. He's come to the hospital to reveal how its radiographers blazed the trail for British medicine.
The Royal London means a pioneering, exciting hospital in a place of really quite significant poverty. Also an innovative place that was applying new technology to help their patients.
Adrian, hello.
Hello.
I'm Michael. How did they do an early X-ray? What was their equipment?
You had a bulb like this. This is an original early X-ray tube, a little bit of gas inside it. It has 2 main electrodes. When the electrons hit, they release energy, either as heat, as light, or as radiation. The problem with the radiation, it comes out in all directions. These early tubes had no protection around them. Everyone around was irradiated.
So originally, there was no understanding that X-rays could be dangerous.
There was no understanding at all, no.
What is this curious piece of equipment?
This is called a cryptoscope. Fluorescent screen is here, hooded so you can look inside. You have your X-ray tube. You put your patient in front of your X-ray tube. X-ray tube be working. You then put your cryptoscope against the patient. I can see your heart beating, I can see your lungs moving, I can see your diaphragm, I can look for any fluid or whatever. This modern imaging allows us to make a diagnosis. If you can diagnose someone when someone is still alive, you can then treat them.
But the terrible thing about this then is the radiation is pouring out behind us, so I'm getting radiation.
You're getting radiation, and I'm getting it as well.
And you're doing it every day.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't leave you with an image. You're just looking at it in real time, are you?
You look at it in real time, yes. To actually take an image, you'll obviously have to have a glass or paper or plate. Actually, I have some examples. This is the wrapping of an original glass plate taken at the Royal London Hospital. And you see there the image there.
That's a joint, is it?
That's the knee, that's the tibia, and here's the fibula with a tumour inside it.
Right. So the London hospital was very quick into adopting X-rays.
Absolutely. A chap called Wilson was appointed and got terribly, terribly excited by the technology. And so, for example, if you want to say test your cryptoscope, there's my hand, have a little look. Oh yeah, I can see my hand, the tube is working really well. So people are using their own hand as a test object. What happened to Ernest Wilson was that he had progressive damage to his hand. And in fact, here is a photograph of his hand showing radiodermatitis. So it's like really bad sunburn. It produces spasm and pain. His fingers then started to show really more severe changes. And in fact, in a rather poignant way, he actually took a series of X-rays of his fingers which showed progressive destruction of his fingers as the bones were initially destroyed, and then he developed cancer in the bone. And then he had his hands amputated and then died from radiation malignancy.
Ernest Wilson was one of 4 radiographers at the London hospital who died as a result of their pioneering work. We take the X-ray completely for granted, but the next time I have one, I'll remember those doctors and technicians in this hospital, the X-ray martyrs, whose sacrifice helped us to find our way to this vital medical technique. The radiographers demonstrated total dedication to medicine, and the ideal of service continued to inspire those who worked at the London hospital.
I was horrified what had happened, and Sister Ashby came running, and she gathered this baby up in her apron, and she ran. I've never seen a woman run like it. She ran all down that corridor, and they had an incubator ready, and they put him in, and he survived.
I'm reaching the end of my investigation of the London hospital in Whitechapel, a beacon of hope for the poor and marginalised. Throughout its astonishing history, its nurses have been its heart and soul. Obviously, we're in a ward. Each one of these lamps would be above a bed, I guess. All the power points are out of the wall now. Oof. In 1880, a young nurse called Eva Luckis was appointed matron at the London. Inspired by her mentor, Florence Nightingale, she transformed it into one of the best training hospitals in Britain. Successive generations of nurses have kept her legacy alive. Geraldine Zoller was just 17 when she came to the London to train as a nurse. So does this ring a bell? Do you remember all this?
Oh, yes, I remember it very well.
What did you look like and what was your uniform like?
Each uniform was made for an individual nurse. I can show, there's a picture. Hide that a bit.
Oh, that's lovely. Very old-fashioned looking nowadays.
It was like a convent. By the time you walked through that door, for 3 years, we went from here to the nurses' home across the garden and back, and that's what we did. This is the gynae ward. Here's the nurses' station. I did night duty here at one stage, which was something I've never forgotten, because the Docklands were still working in those days, and life was quite rough for women down there. There were quite a lot of prostitutes down there. And I was here alone on night duty, and it was very dark. This lady was brought in, and she's bleeding. At that stage, I hadn't worked here very long, and I was quite junior. I was just out of school, really, and it was dark and horrible, and she suddenly called out, "Nurse, nurse, there's something in the bed." I went, "Oh, my God, there's something in the bed." And I pulled it back, and there was a baby. Nobody even said she was pregnant. No. So I pressed the bell, and Sister Ashby, who was the night sister, came running, and she gathered this baby up in her apron, and she ran. I've never seen a woman run like a big woman. She ran all down that corridor with this miniature baby. It was so small. And I was horrified what had happened. I'd never seen the birth of a baby before, and it was totally unexpected. And Sister Ashby ran up to the children's ward with this baby, and they had an incubator ready, and they put him in, and he survived.
Hearing Geraldine talk about her work amongst people on low incomes, down on their luck, confirms that 200 years after the foundation of this hospital, it was still providing services to those normally at the margins of our society. And this outstanding hospital has never stopped pushing the boundaries of medicine. In 1989, the London Hospital reached out to the entire metropolis, inaugurating the city's first air ambulance service operating from the top of that building. In 2012, the old hospital closed and transferred to this gleaming new tower and the helicopter to its roof. Now the concept is that they take the expertise of the hospital out to the patient. So in situ, they can open up the chest and they can perform open heart surgery. And I suppose this then is the culmination of 250 years of medical experience on this site. Royal London anaesthetist Alistair Mulcahy is one of a team who work with the air ambulance. Stephen Nyland is a former patient of his. How are you doing?
Really nice to meet you.
And who's this?
This is Stephen.
I'm Michael. How do you do?
I'm good, thank you. Stephen is a patient I treated in London's air ambulance about 18 years ago. We got a call. There's a stabbing in a pub, and when we got there, Stevie looked like he was about to stop breathing. So then we made an incision. So essentially running from one side across the chest here and up to the other side. Just before I did that, I said to the police who were there, I said, this might look a little bit extreme. And then we both set off from each side with a pair of scissors. We met in the middle and had to just cut through the bit of bone in the sternum in the middle. The heart was not moving at all. It was completely at standstill. But then a jet of blood came out, so clearly there was a hole in the heart. So then I immediately just said, we can't put a stitch in here. I just put my finger in it. And it actually stemmed the flow of blood immediately. Stephen has let us show you a picture. So this is Stephen with his chest open. There's my hand and the finger in his heart.
That's the finger in the dike.
The finger in the dike.
Wow, that is, you look a mess, Stephen. You're not looking at your best there. How did you get Stephen back here?
So as we're just about to leave the pub to get in the ambulance, there's hundreds of people outside. And I said, right, well, hang on just a moment, we just need a blanket, just cover you up, so I can't walk out like this and with the chest open. So we just covered you up and pretended I was holding your hand as we got in the back of the ambulance.
What do you feel about it, Stephen?
You know, if it wasn't for Alistair and the team, I wouldn't be here today.
The Royal London Air Ambulance provides spectacular evidence of the hospital's work, whose roots stretch back 2.5 centuries to an institution founded to care for the poor and marginalised. The East End of London was a rough and tumble place to practice medicine amongst the squalor, where people struggled to survive against vice and criminality and epidemics. Inside this hospital, doctors, anaesthetists, anatomists and nurses fought against disease. This place pioneered medical care for the poor at a time when that represented the finest ideal of private philanthropy. And it was still serving its community when that concept had been universalised in the National Health Service. In the next programme, I'm prizing open the doors to a top-secret spy facility.
The Russians could get you into a very compromising position.
You could be seduced and blackmailed.
I was never that lucky.
And what kind of size was this thing?
Huge. I mean, it covered over 300 acres.
And a labyrinth of mysterious military laboratories.
A roof that is not a roof. I think these must have been enormous doors. What went on here?